Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here. Hope you're all doing wonderful today. Welcome to today's webinar, Move Smarter, Not Harder. We're going to talk about tips and tricks for seamless email, contact, and calendar migrations. Of course, in today's fast paced digital world, data migration is critical for the daunting task of MSPs. Whether you're transitioning clients to a new platform or maybe doing some type of consolidation, ensuring smooth and error free migrations is essential. So that's why we are thrilled to have not just one, but two experts on our panel today. We've got Chris Roy, Solutions Architect, and Josh Kirker, the Customer Success Engineer, both from MoveBot with us today. They're going to share some of their experiences and insights on how to streamline the migration process, minimize downtime, and ensure a positive customer insurance for your clients. And with that being said, let's dive in. Welcome, Mr. Chris Roy and Josh Kirker. How you guys doing today?
Hey Dan, thanks for having us. Yeah, doing good. Happy to be here.
Excellent.
Um, yeah, should be fun.
Awesome. Good to see
Yeah,
you, Josh. Chris, how you doing today?
fantastic. Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to be back here. I know we've done a few before, looking to forward to having a bit of a chat about emails, and absolute pleasure to have my colleague Josh here along. He is our resident mail expert at the minute, so he's got some
Nice.
some great info to share with y'all.
Well, I gotta say that doing email migrations, is not something that you can just close your eyes, wave a magic wand, and it just have it all happen all by itself. But we can make it easier, right? We can make it less daunting. The name of the game is ensuring that we've got a quality process in place. We're using the proper tools to ensure that we can move data where it needs to be. And I'm sure you guys are seeing migrations that are happening all over the board, whether it's from on-prem to cloud, maybe cloud to cloud, all over the board, correct?
Yeah, it's pretty common that we see a lot of like tenant to tenant when people are merging companies or acquiring new companies, and then we'll see a lot of on-prem exchange to cloud, and then there's always the people that want to switch from Google to Microsoft or Microsoft to Google. So
Right.
pretty
Exactly.
pretty pretty good mix of everything.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I would assume that we're, long beyond the days of, the good old POP3 and IMAP migrations to Exchange, right?
We still definitely get some of those. There's still a lot of
Yeah.
people out there using
Okay.
like cPanel email and stuff.
Wow.
But yeah,
So
they
those are, yeah, those are fun in some regard, right? I mean, we haven't seen that in quite some time, but I remember those days of just the experience for that client moving them something from a pop based email to exchange. I mean, their minds are blown where they've got that synchronization, right?
yeah.
So haven't had to had that joy working with clients in quite some time, but yeah, let's go ahead and kick things off for any of our audience. Feel free to throw any questions, whether you're live in the call or if you're watching via streaming out there in Facebook world, YouTube, LinkedIn, and so on. Just go ahead and throw any questions that you have our way. We're here to answer them for you. And with that being said, let's go ahead and share our slide deck here, and we will kick things off.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dan. As you mentioned, yeah, we're really focused on getting that seamless email, contact, and calendar migrations out of the way. For those that haven't heard of MoveBot before, we are sort of a data migration suite. We focus on really delivering simple and efficient and lightning fast migrations. As Dan kind of mentioned before, we sort of do a bit of everything. For the longest time, we have focused primarily on the file migrations, so things like cloud to cloud, on-prem to cloud, and tenant to tenant migrations. About a year and a half ago, we started to transition into the email space. So we now do migrations from Google to Outlook, vice versa, your IMAP exchange, all the fun stuff there. We'll talk a little bit more about that today and get into a little bit more detail there. To kick things off, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we like to call the MoveBot method. Some of the people who have attended Dan's webinars before may have seen us here talking about this. This is kind of our three-step approach that we use when performing any migration, whether it's mail or data migrations. This is really designed to kind of keep it simple, and we break that down into the plan, advance, and cutover. A little bit on the planning stage, just to sort of high level what you need to keep in mind. It's really about determining what the migration will look like and how you're going to approach it. There are a few key things to kind of keep in mind there. Proof of concept is always the first thing that we like to mention. Being prepared and running that POC ahead of time with a small batch of users, that is the best way to kind of surface any concerns or issues prior to the bulk migration. And it's really important to have a combination of like not just you running a test, but integrating it with your users as well and checking. You never know what users are going to be concerned about and might not be in line with what you're looking for.
I think I just wanted to throw one thing out, that proof of concept, while it's critical for us just to make sure that we're seeing, maybe what those few users look like, we also have to understand that, these type of migrations are an incredible amount of stress for our clients. And, I think having this capability, this proof of concept, puts them at ease, gives them more of that peace of mind. So they know that, things are looking good, no matter how much faith they have in us, right? I mean, they still know that technology is technology. It's not black and white. And sometimes, issues will occur and they're on edge, right? And so I think this is great for that.
For sure. It definitely gives them the opportunity to kind of get a little bit familiar with the destination, and you can test with those trusted users, and they can also help be your advocates. If they've seen your success in your POC, they can be advocates when you sort of do the remainder transition for all your users. They can help sort of bring up those other users up to date and make sure that everyone is on board with this transition.
Yeah.
The getting a little bit technical on the front end here is this calendar events. Calendars are always a little bit of fun when you're doing migrations, and one thing to sort of keep in mind there is if you're transitioning between domains, you need to keep in mind that when event invitations are sort of added in the destination, you want to make sure that that domain is transitioned to the destination platform as well. So just some minor considerations around how the sort of, events will come across and what to keep in mind with that. As you're sort of going through M&As or this sort of thing, these are the sorts of things you might need to be aware of. They're little gotchas here and there.
Okay.
For anyone who has been through one of these webinars with MoveBot before, we, especially for our file migrations, we often talk about a discovery scan as part of the scan stage. So when you're doing a file migration, it's really great to sort of run a scan of your entire environment up front, get an understanding of how much data you have, how it's distributed. File migrations, you often have file type conversions that need to occur or invalid characters to be aware of, path length issues. There's a lot of information that can be really helpful to have up front with a data migration. And that's where the scan is really helpful. That is specific to a file migration. When you're migrating email, you don't have to worry about those same concerns with regards to file type or invalid characters. You can actually be pretty confident skipping the scan and save a lot of time by doing so. It's quite time consuming to iterate through a large mailbox. And if you can save time by just mapping everything out and getting your data moving, that's a great approach when you're working with a mail migration. For the sort of following on from that, you have your overarching migration strategy. And this is where you're determining, okay, how am I going to split things up? How am I going to organize stuff and ensure that, depending on how much time I have and the needs of the organization, how can we kind of balance those items and ensure that the strategy we're choosing is best suited to, our sort of requirements there. So Josh is going to talk a little bit now about our migration strategies. There are a couple of really great strategies here that should cover all your needs with regards to your migrations.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Chris.
Excellent.
Yeah, so this is probably the most common thing that you should probably do if you have the time to plan appropriately. So this is where you bring over all your historical data first. So we'll seed all your historical data up to last 3 months is probably a good point. This is so users can continue using their current email tool without creating duplicates or anything. So if they're moving emails around or deleting emails, typically they're doing that with their stuff that's coming in. They're reorganizing it and stuff. So it's good to basically sync the data up to the last 90 days, and that'll get most of the data out of the way. So when we come back in for the cutover, we can move that last 90 days of emails very quickly. So yeah, the strategy for this one is initial transfer up to the last 90 days. And then after the last 90 days, we will do a cutover delta. So we will only bring over the last 90 days of content. These cutover deltas should be much quicker. So the first delta will likely be, depending on how large the mailboxes are, it could be a couple days, could be a week, depending on how much data you're moving. And then the cutover delta should be very quick. So each mailbox should only be around 30 minutes, an hour at the most if it's a ridiculous user that sends a lot of emails. But most users aren't going to be sending that much over the last 3 months. And then after the cutover, we'll do one more sanity delta just to make sure that we haven't missed anything. So we'll bring over all that stuff. So when you're doing the cutover, there's going to be a lull period where you're not sure which one is active, which MX records are active. So we'll do one more delta after the cutover and bring over any missing data.
Okay, so when that occurs, even after you've made that MX record changeover, you're still going to be able to do that post cutover, and everything is going to synchronize, and you'll have that full delta then.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing to keep in mind is if you are doing like a tenant to tenant when you're changing the domain. So when you do the cutover, if you have to change the domain on one side and then change the domain on the other side, you'll just have to update MoveBot with the new mapping. So you'll just have to come back in, change the domain to the old domain or the new domain on each side, and we'll still be able to connect. Sync deltas will still work perfectly.
Okay. So regardless of whether we're doing an on-prem to I mean really any of the formats. I mean it could be on-prem to on-prem, on-prem to cloud, cloud. I mean I've heard scenarios of cloud back to on-prem, right? I mean it's there are mind-boggling and really all options that are out there. Is any of these different type of formats really have an impact on this process, or is it pretty much the same across the board?
Yeah, Will. So with IMAP IMAP won't support this feature. So IMAP, it's just all or nothing. So with
Okay.
IMAP, we have to move everything. We don't have a good standardized way of just scanning for certain dates or like using an API call to only pull things for like the last 3 months. So we'll always scan everything. So with
Okay.
IMAP, you do need to plan that accordingly. Just be prepared for that. You just need to move all the data, rescan all the data. So it is a little more time consuming with IMAP, or it
Okay.
could be pretty fast as well. The benefit to IMAP servers and in on-prem Exchange servers is the API restrictions is really just how good is your server. And if it's really good, you'll probably be a lot faster than a lot of these
Yeah.
cloud providers. So we've seen some on-prem servers really go very quickly. But much quicker
And I
than
would,
the 365 from Google.
yeah, I mean, and I would suspect that most are going from on-prem to cloud. That most of those on-prem are older servers. I mean, it's speculation, right? But I would think that most of those times they're finally getting around to doing it the right way, and moving to the cloud and moving off of those older type of equipment.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. A lot of them are much worse. But yeah, we're doing one with Exchange 2010 right now, and it's blazing fast. Actually, it's like way
Yeah.
faster than anything with M365. So even some of those old servers still have some kick to them.
And Christopher from France, welcome, Christopher. He threw a message out there saying the biggest pain with IMAP is having to get all mailbox passwords. Yeah, so
Yeah,
there's always
for sure.
that fun and enough to make you pull your hair out, right?
For sure. Yeah, getting users to give you their passwords. One, you don't want to ask for their passwords because you tell them not to do that. And then
Right.
two, changing their passwords means they don't have access to it. It's just not good.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely can sympathize with that.
Right.
The other strategy, this is less common, but people still use it. It's really just if you have to move and you have to move now, and for whatever reason people need to be using the destination, the best strategy here is let's only bring over the last 6 months of email so we
Mm.
can move it very quickly. And then just like in the other one, we can still do the cutover, and then we'll come back and grab the remaining email, and that'll just trickle into their mailbox over time while they're using the destination. So they just won't have access to their previous emails, but they are still there, and they will just trickle into their mailbox as they continue to use the destination.
What are some of those scenarios? I mean, when someone needs to make a quick jump like that?
The most recent one was a customer that had a botched acquisition and they needed
Mm.
to separate again quickly.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah, so they did an acquisition, they merged everything, and then it fell through, and they needed to unmerge, and they needed
Oh,
to go
wow.
back to the previous one, and they needed to do it immediately. So
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a fun one for anybody involved.
no,
It must have been an instant culture clash to say, "Hey, we're pulling the plug on this merger acquisition."
yeah, don't know what happened, but yeah, it
Yeah,
made for some uncomfortable support calls for sure, where we had both
right.
parties on the phone. But it wasn't too bad. We got everything moved, but yeah,
Well, I
that
want to ask you
doesn't
something.
happen
You
often.
just mentioned about both parties being on the phone. You guys do provide support to MSPs as you're assisting them, right? So
Yeah, for
they're
sure.
not on their own. It's not like in overall, we're talking about, mail migration strategies overall, but I mean, you guys do this, you have a product. So I do want to reference, that aspect of it. So it's not like you're just grabbing something that's an off the shelf, migration tool. And it's like, all right, our hands are clean. You're on your own. You do provide assistance along the way.
Yeah, for sure. So our support, we have individuals here in New Zealand where me and Chris are located, and then we have individuals in the States and Europe as well. So
Okay.
we try to cover all our bases. But yes, we always have support. Support is always free. There's no charge or extra for support or anything like that. Yeah, you are always free and able to contact support, and we will always hop on a call with you if need be.
Do you get a lot of MSPs that take advantage of that?
Constantly. Yep. Me and Chris have both
Nice.
had calls today already.
Yeah.
So before we even got on this webinar, and we have calls afterwards. So we will
Yeah. Yeah,
be
and it's
booked
bright and
pretty
early
much
there
every
for you
day.
guys. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah, I
yeah.
start taking calls at 5 in the morning. So
Okay. Well, that's
yeah.
great. It's great to hear too, from multiple perspectives. As MSPs, we want to be able to, grow and expand our business. and to be able to take on different work. And sometimes we run into snags. Maybe we don't have the talent in certain areas. So, partnering with an organization that can be an extension of our team is incredible. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important part, and yeah, we do try. We believe we make an effort at least to go above
Yeah.
and beyond and be as helpful as possible.
Nice. All right, we got
Perfect.
a poll here.
Yeah, if you.
So
Not
with
sure
our
how we
poll
want to-
here, what is your most common mail migration? And what are you guys looking for here from as far as to hearing from any?
Mostly like IMAP, on-prem, Exchange,
Okay.
cloud to cloud, tenant to tenant. Those would be the four main
Yeah,
options, I
and
think.
any of our listeners, if you're there on chat, you want to just throw in what is common for you guys, that would be great to hear. I just while we wait here just for any responses, I am curious what what is your number one? I mean, what is the most common, and then what is the most obscure that you guys have seen?
Yeah, so the most common is definitely going to 365. I think
Okay.
it's just kind of inevitable. Microsoft is the behemoth in this world,
Yeah.
and most people are moving to Microsoft. We do work, Christopher is one of them, and we do work with a lot of Google MSPs as well. So we do a lot of things to Google. Yeah, the Google MSPs are pretty big in our ecosystem. So
Okay.
we deal with a lot of those, but Microsoft is definitely the behemoth. Most of them go to them. The most obscure is definitely just the random IMAP servers. When you work with an IMAP server you've never heard of, it's just some random Danish web hosting company that, they do things differently, and we got to figure out how to incorporate them into our current IMAP
Yeah.
migration. So
I was waiting to
those are
hear
the most
something
obscure.
really obscure like IMAP to IMAP.
Oh, so point of
I would,
clarification, we don't support anything other than Google or Microsoft as the destination. So
yeah, there you go. I would hope not.
yeah.
And
Certainly
yeah, it looks
keeps
like
things a lot simpler when you keep it to those two. That's for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it looks like I see a response out there that he can confirm that support is there to help when he's running into weird, impossible migrations and needs help. So that's pretty cool. And also, IMAP to Google, um, and then Google. Let's see, or Microsoft. Yeah, then Micro. Oh no, IMAP to Google Gmail to Google.
Yeah.
And then also Microsoft to Google. Okay, so those are
Yeah.
a couple examples there. So,
Yep.
all right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
go ahead and
Christopher
close
is
our
one of our
poll
Google
out there.
MSPs. So
Okay, very nice.
Perfect.
all right. And then advanced. So this is the next step. So a little bit of a recap of what I just talked about, but yeah, we will do the initial transfer. Depending on which method you've chosen, we'll either bring over all the historical data up to whatever date you selected, and then, or we will bring over the recent day mail, and then, yeah, so that'll be the initial transfer. Then you'll want to review your failures, see if anything has gone wrong, and then you'll want to do a delta of what you've just run. So it'll be the historical data or the recent data. And this will basically just be to correct any failures and just make sure that you haven't missed anything.
Okay.
With APIs, there's always a slim chance that something is missed. This step can often be skipped. People do opt to skip it because it's very unlikely that something is missed, but we will always recommend it's a good idea just to do one sanity check and make sure that nothing has been missed.
Okay.
But if you're really pressed for time, it is a skippable step. And then you will want to do a cutover delta. So this will be a recent delta if you've opted to only move the historical data. And this will bring over the content that you've originally skipped. So if you've done up to the last 90 days, you'll bring over the last 90 days of content. If you've done it the other way around, you'll just kind of skip this step and you'll do a full delta further down the chain. Then you'll want to update the MX records. And just keep in mind that if you are doing a tenant to tenant migration, that you will be updating the domains. And when you update the domains, you'll need to make sure that you update the tool as well to make sure that nothing, basically that you can do your next deltas since it'll be a new email address on both sides.
Okay.
Optional, you can then remove access from the source if you don't want users to have access to it. This part isn't required. And then last, you'll run your partial delta. This will be a post cutover delta. So you'll just do another recent delta if you've only brought over the historical data. This will again just be an integrity check. Make sure that while you were doing the cutover, the MX record changes, then no other last minute emails came in. And just make sure that, nothing was missed.
Yeah, and Christopher had thrown out a very good point of making sure to not forget changing
Yes.
SPF, DKIM, DMARC. Otherwise,
Yep.
you're in a world of trouble, right?
Yeah. Sending will be a problem if you don't do that stuff. So you will
Yeah.
need that as well.
Yeah. Where would you say that what is like one of the most common areas that an MSP might overlook during this process, like up to this point so far?
So the most common thing is people will just do a full migration, which is fine. But the only issue is that users are going to keep using their email, and there is a higher likelihood, like if you get an email today, there's a good chance that you're going to put a label on it, or you're going to move it somewhere else, or move it to
Yeah.
another folder. And that's going to cause duplicates, because if we move it over and you haven't labeled it or anything yet, when we do it again, it'll now be labeled and we'll put it in the new spot, or it'll be moved into a new folder and we'll put it in the new
Okay.
spot. So it's a mild thing. It causes a little bit of a headache for the end users on cutover. So that's probably the most overlooked thing, is that we can help alleviate that for the end user by not
Okay.
moving over those emails
Yeah.
right away.
So project plan. What? Wait. We should plan. We should have a plan in place.
Yeah, so basically, just to kind of summarize, it's just an overview of those few steps. Is that plan, advance, cutover.
Yeah.
So as Josh has kind of run through, with these three steps, you're a lot more prepared once you've selected that migration strategy and kind of followed it right through to the cutover. You'll find that at the end of it, you're in a much better scenario there. And yeah, it can be quite daunting when there's a few of these options around, and you're not really sure which route to go. Even again, the difference that it can make choosing one of the strategies provided over sort of just bringing everything across. You can alleviate a lot of headache for end users just by understanding what options there are and what's going to work best for your team.
Yeah, and I think what's so critical here is just educating the client and all end users about this plan. They don't need to know the nitty gritty, like into the weeds type scenario, but the two things that I always like to go over in really any kind of project. Number one, what to expect, so that they have that idea of what to expect, and number two, what could go wrong. And it is so much easier to address issues with them if you have given them a heads up that these are things that could go wrong in worst case scenarios. We're going to do our best to, try to, mitigate any of those type of issues. But if they know about it, it's so much easier to go to them and talk with them about, an issue if it occurs. Versus if you don't say anything, they have this perception that everything is going to be smooth. You're going to wave a magic wand and everything is going to work. And then, so then when you do address an issue with them, they're going to be like, whoa, wait a minute. I wasn't expecting this. So to, again, what to expect and what could go wrong are the two primary things that are critical in every project.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it goes back to the classic under promise, over deliver. You always want
Yeah.
to have all your bases checked and be able to over deliver on your promises. The other thing that you've mentioned here, making sure that clients don't move data, that's a big thing, is making sure that they're not going in and changing folder names and stuff like that, because that will be a big
Yeah.
headache for the client, because we'll just duplicate everything again. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. That's probably, back to your question earlier, that's probably the biggest thing they should really watch out for and advise their clients of, is no major restructuring of their data or changing of their data.
What
while
about scenarios where yeah, I mean, you got scenarios where someone's like, oh, you know what? I don't need to move everything over. There's no need for me to have this. And, at the end of the day, storage is cheap, is plentiful, from most providers. And you really want to have that historical data. You never know when you might need it, whether it be for, you know, client purposes, like depending on what line of business that they're in, there's something that they need to refer back to, or for legal purposes. I mean, do you find that some feel as if, oh, I should clean house before we do these migrations versus just saying, let's move everything over because we have it.
Yeah, people love hoarding their data for sure. I
Yeah,
don't think that'll ever change, but there is also a niche of, for legal purposes, a lot of people, they want to eliminate their data as soon as that legal retention period is over. So they don't want, you don't want to have data around that you aren't legally obligated to hold, because
sure,
that's just
sure.
more liability for yourself. So yeah, there are people like that as well, where they're like, I only want the last 8 years of email because that's all I'm legally required to hold. Only bring that. So
Right.
yeah, that happens as well.
Excellent. All right. What is the average time frame you have to complete a mail migration? So we got a poll question here. Go ahead and throw your answer into chat. What is the average time frame you have to complete a mail migration? Um, three
Curious
minutes.
to curious to see what people have to say there. And Dan, it's we see a bit of a mixed bag come through. There's I mean, we see it with data as well, but I think
Yeah,
something people often run into with mail migrations, especially if they're not super familiar with them, is that mail can be deceiving or take a deceivingly long period of time compared to a data migration. Uh, you might have 500 gig of email across your user base, and you think to yourself, okay, 500 gig, that's nothing. Like I should be able to knock that out in a day or maybe over the weekend. But it is, it makes a difference when emails are very small files. It can take much longer to transfer those. So I think people can often run into trouble with their expectations on that front. So I'm quite curious to see what people are experiencing in terms of, you know, their deadlines. How long do they normally end up having, or gets allocated to run these migrations?
yeah, and I think depending on the scenario, I mean, the client wants it done as soon as possible, right? I mean, there's the reality between their expectations and the true capabilities of doing that, and
Yeah.
Looks like got one. I'm not handling huge migrations. The minimum is a week. Migration error checks Delta, but usually takes multiple weeks. Google APIs are a pain for mail migrations. Okay, there's one there, and and I've seen from past experience, we've got situations for the most part when most managed clients, they're gonna take what you say is as far as an expectation of the completion. They're gonna trust what your recommendation is and what you feel it's going to take. I think might be different in co-managed type scenarios where you've got an internal IT. They might be under certain deadlines and their expectation is that it's going to happen faster. Or on the flip side, they might understand that it's going to take longer. So it's really all over the board.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, as Josh mentioned earlier, a common one we sort of see is people get into M&As or divestitures and the sort of stuff where they have to kind of move quickly, and that's often where people kind of get put under these time crunches. Is they sort of have a deadline they have to get out and make things happen. So it's always a bit fun.
Yeah,
it's always worse when the deadlines are legally enforceable.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
For sure.
Awesome. So I'm going to take a little bit of time now to talk about some of our common platforms. So we've touched on sort of what sort of strategy you might opt to use when doing these migrations. Now we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of some of these platforms. A few of these items have kind of been mentioned already, but I think it's really important to sort of understand key items to keep in mind with some of these platforms. So up first, we have Google Workspace. And for each of these platforms, touch a little bit on what sort of performance expectations you can kind of expect to see. On the Google side, we normally can expect up to around 800 emails per minute. We like to use the emails per minute to sort of calculate roughly what the sort of performance is like. So a little bit easier to work with than sort of like a volume metric, given the size of the emails can differ a lot, and so kind of just getting an average on the number of emails is often a lot easier for people to understand in terms of speed for mail migrations.
Okay.
On the one thing that's really important to keep in mind when you're coming from Google into Microsoft is that Google allows much larger mailbox sizes than Microsoft. So it's not uncommon to see someone who has a really large mailbox in Google that far exceeds the Microsoft limits, and you just need to be aware of that when you're kind of moving data across. That you need to account for this with, either online archives or splitting things up into, a couple of locations there as well. I'm not sure if anyone has dealt with that before, but yeah, in-place archives are fun.
Yeah. I want to jump back to the performance component. I mean, I realize that there's performance related, like the processor, the machine is coming from, and so on, server is coming from. What about their internet bandwidth? I mean, do you think that in most cases people have appropriately sized bandwidth, or are you still seeing issues out there where it's slowed down just because they have very limited bandwidth?
Bandwidth is a little less of a concern with the mail side because most of the data is quite small.
Okay.
So even if you're retrieving a very large number of emails at one time, say you're retrieving 200 emails at once from the server as part of that transfer, then if they're 100 kilobytes per email, it's not a whole lot of bandwidth to kind of consume when pulling all of those. The more impactful thing these days is going to be rate limiting when you're working on sort of cloud to cloud migrations.
Okay.
So these cloud platforms, they put in place somewhat arbitrary rate limits, and these can kind of vary depending on tenant size and a variety of other things. That's usually the more pressing thing there for sure.
And definitely something that's outside of our control.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's the most frustrating part about it is, you can pay money for a bigger internet pipe. You can't necessarily pay money for increased API limits on your Google tenant.
yeah, and you're not gonna make a call to Google or Microsoft and have them make some adjustments for you.
Most of the time, not. If you're an exceptionally large organization, you might be able to pull a few strings, but
Sure,
most of the
sure.
time it's a no go.
And if you figure out a way, if you have that phone number, let us know.
Yeah.
A couple of other things on the Google front. So at least with our tool, we do support the insert method, which is an optional feature for going into Google. This can be used to increase performance for those migrations going into Google Workspace. The one thing to note with that is the insert method sort of bypasses the mechanisms that handle conversation threading and categorization. Google does some stuff around, it's like updates and marketing and the sort of stuff that it'll categorize your emails into. So the insert method can be really helpful for bringing over the historical data. Most people don't really mind if the historical stuff doesn't have conversation threads because they're usually searching for it. Whereas, the more recent data, you probably want to retain those conversation threads.
Okay.
The final one on the Google front is labels and folders. So anyone who's worked with Google before will know that Google doesn't really use this folder concept. They have what they call labels. So emails can be tagged with multiple labels. And what's important to keep in mind is that when you're transitioning from Google Workspace into Microsoft, you would have if an email has been tagged with multiple labels, it would be added, multiple times to each of the respective folders for those labels in Microsoft. So those labels would become folders, and you'd have a copy of the mail in each folder. So that's one that people are often curious about what that difference is.
So just for clarification on that, so if you have an email, so in a traditional, 365, you've got a vendors folder. Within the vendors folder, you have the name of the vendor. You move it to that folder, boom, end of story. But in a world with Google, with those labels, there could be a label that says vendor, the name of the vendor. Could also have maybe another label that says marketing.
Mhm.
So it's going to put that into 3 different folders if there are 3 different labels.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'll
Okay.
have 3 copies of that email in the destination, one in each of the locations that it was kind of tagged with. And so, yeah, if you're particularly heavy with label use and use them with multiple labels, your users may notice that in the destination.
Yeah, so that's a huge, what to expect type
Mm.
scenario to go over, right? And I mean, do you find that people in the Google world use multiple labels for messages, or is it pretty much like one label as if they were putting in one folder?
I think it varies quite a bit. Yeah, it comes up a decent amount, so it's definitely not something that is negligible. The amount of people that are using multiple labels. The issue is really like you kind of have 2 options. It's either you put it in every label, or we are the masters and choose which label it is, and that's not really a great solution either, because then
Right.
it may not be where you want it to go. So
Okay. So it's gonna
yeah.
it will it automatically create a folder based on the label? So if there are 3 labels, it's gonna create 3 folders and
Yeah, Google doesn't have the
okay,
concept of folders, so a label is kind of the same thing as a folder.
okay.
Um, so yeah, it creates a folder for every label, and then it'll put the emails in each one.
That's that could be quite a headache. It can be quite a, paradigm shift for them. Just reading an additional note here, the multiple label feature is something we teach a lot to end users during change management phases. So it's used a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's critical as far as from an educational perspective.
Yeah, it's a big shift from going from a Google environment to a Microsoft environment for sure. So it's
Yeah.
definitely some user education around the differences between the two platforms.
And you could be doubling or quadrupling the size of your overall data then in those cases, correct?
It's possible that we don't see I don't think I've ever seen it double. Usually
Okay.
it's like a handful of emails that have that many labels.
Okay. Gotcha.
But yeah, because most users still are most users you encounter, I'm sure you would agree that they just leave everything in their center inbox, and
Yeah.
and that's most of their
Exa-
emails. But yeah,
Yeah.
they will still have a handful of emails that are multi-labeled.
Yep. Or
But
those
I don't think
that
I've ever seen one double in size.
yeah. Yeah, I do recall I think we had a client at one time that had an enormous deleted folder, and we were talking about emptying that, and I just remember the fear, the look of the fear of God on that guy's face when he's like, wait a minute, that's my folder. I go back through my deleted items, and as if it's just another storage location. So yeah, end
We have
user
encountered that as well.
yeah, exactly.
That's where that POC really comes in, and you find out stuff like that when a user goes, "Oh, I'm not too happy about that one."
Right. Exactly.
Wonderful. So we have actually two slides here to talk about with the Microsoft side. The first one that we will touch on is the Graph API side. The reason for these two slides is Microsoft actually has two mechanisms or kind of two APIs that are available for sort of handling mail, contact, calendars, migration stuff at the moment. So up first is the Graph API. This is very similar performance-wise to the Google side. You can expect around 800 mails per minute. And this is Microsoft's modern API. So the API we'll talk about next, EWS, is sort of far older. It's been around since the original Exchange service and has kind of been the de facto mechanism for managing mail for the longest time. Microsoft is in the process of transitioning slowly but surely to the Graph API. They have not fully added or like fully fleshed out support for all of the items that the EWS currently supports. One of the big items that the Graph API is still missing is there is no support for in-place archives. So as we mentioned before, especially when you're coming from large Google environments or even old Microsoft environments, a lot of people depend on in-place archives and sort of having that additional storage space outside of their their 100 gig quotas to kind of fill out. So this is not currently available via the Graph API. We hope that it will be there soon.
Okay.
Yeah. The only other thing to be aware of with the Graph API is on the event invitations. So if you are migrating calendars, the Graph API requires that when calendar events are added, that a fresh invitation is sent to all of the attendees. For anyone that has been using calendars a while, I'm sure you can imagine how receiving 20 years worth of calendar invitations all again is not ideal. So pretty much if you're doing any kind of calendar migration, we recommend you use the EWS connector, and we'll touch on that. Now, this is just a little bit of a brief overview on sort of where things are going to be slowly transitioning to in the future.
Okay.
Cool. So the EWS API, this would be the recommended method for transferring data or emails, contacts, calendars at the moment. MoveBot obviously supports both the Graph API and EWS mechanisms. And so this is our sort of recommendation for the time being. And we are prepared for when the Graph API sort of becomes fully available with all the functionality. EWS is a slightly older API. Performance can be very similar to the Graph API at times, but often we see, about a third or so of the performance there, up to around 200 emails per minute. It sort of depends on the environments you're coming from. This can obviously be a very, very variable amount in terms of throughput there. The EWS API is fully featured, so it allows access to all of the Microsoft, specialties, we'll call them, the in-place archives, your public folders, and it also ensures that you do not need to send out 20 years worth of email calendar invites. So for when you're doing especially tenant-to-tenant migrations and Microsoft or anything really Microsoft centric, the EWS connector is going to be your friend.
Excellent.
Only thing to note here, obviously, is that this API has been flagged for deprecation, and MoveBot will be there to sort of support you through that transition as the Graph API becomes the standard. You'll have access to all of the features as they sort of come to the Graph API.
Do you have a kind of an ETA on that?
Microsoft says 2 years, and that it should be like, I think it's end of end of this year or next. Is that right, Josh?
Oh, I last I saw, they have a beautiful article out there from November or October of last year that says we will update you with a timeline soon. And I haven't seen a timeline added to that article yet. And it's just people asking, is there a timeline yet? So
gotcha.
Yeah, people asking for timelines.
That's a good question.
Yeah, a lot of asking for timelines and a lot of asking about like when, they've announced the deprecation of this, but they haven't actually, produced a fully functioning replacement yet. So I think a lot of people are still waiting for some of those features to kind of come with regards to the in-place archives. There's, there is good stuff happening there, and I think we're all looking forward to that sort of completed transition, and I think there'll be a lot of happy customers around once that's sort of all been switched over.
Yeah, I think the comment maybe it's time to move away from Microsoft to Google. It is so interesting out there. I mean, it's like Android versus iOS, right? I mean, it's just there's such strong desire, strong loyalty, I should say, to one product or the other. I do recall us setting up a small real estate organization, and they had been using Google in the past, and we talked with them about doing 365, and they went forward with it. And I would say maybe about a year later, they had enough and they couldn't make that switch. And it's a tough thing. I mean, change is difficult for many. And I mean, that would be like me moving away from my Samsung to an Apple phone. And I couldn't do it. It's not happening.
I got a company iPhone here, and I've been trying to make the transition now for about 8 months, and I still carry around both phones because it's so hard. And it's simple stuff like just navigating is completely different. Like you swipe one way on one phone and you swipe the other way, and I don't have my back buttons, and it's the same thing. You're stuck in an ecosystem with Google or Microsoft, and switching out of those is really hard, especially for people that have been using Outlook for 20 years and they use that app and that's all they know how to use. And taking that away from them just
They're
makes
lost.
them sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, and from our perspective, being in a very vendor agnostic position, from our side, it really is just a case of pick your poison. There's, you take a look at either of these platforms from like a technical standpoint, and you're going to be able to poke some holes in either, and find your frustrations. And I think, yeah, a lot of it just comes down to which one you're most comfortable with, and a lot of the time that is just how well you know the quirks of each system, and how well you know how to deal with anything that kind of crops up. And it's if someone, as Josh says, has been using Outlook forever, it's going to be awfully frightening to have to use a browser to access Gmail.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think most MSPs are, obviously much more of a Microsoft shop across the board, but you do have some MSPs out there that specialize in Google, and I think that's the power of networking, the power of community. Leveraging your resources, ensuring that when you go to a conference, and you meet others, you identify what are their strengths and weaknesses, and identify what those strengths are, because if they're very, very Google savvy, and, you run into a client situation down the road, you got someone that you can reach out to. And that's the beauty of our IT channel. And, so bottom line is, leverage the resources that are out there.
Awesome. Right, must be time to talk about the beautiful IMAP. It is our last platform we will touch on today, and so yeah, nice to round out with the oldest of the bunch.
Yeah.
So on the performance front, as Josh kind of mentioned earlier, performance with IMAP is going to vary significantly. Depending on which server you're sort of connecting to. We have seen IMAP servers perform as well, if not better, than some Google or Microsoft Cloud options. They can be very performant. On the other end, they can also be incredibly slow. And if you're coming from older systems, that can be quite cumbersome. The other thing to sort of be aware of, obviously, of course, is like any open standard, there is a variety of flavors of that standard, and people implement it ever so slightly differently. And so, when you're running IMAP migrations from web servers, you are far more likely to run into something unusual with your specific IMAP server that needs to be accommodated. Than some of the more standard platforms. Obviously, IMAP does not support contacts or calendars, at least not built into the protocol, and so it is mail only. I think as someone in the chat mentioned earlier, biggest part of IMAP migrations is going to be your authentication requirements. So when the protocol doesn't support any kind of administrative or bulk access of mailboxes, you have to retrieve the individual usernames and password for each user's mailbox. This can be incredibly cumbersome, and of course these need to be provided to your migration tool as well. With MoveBot specifically, we do support the ability for you to import a big CSV that basically highlights all of your source users and their passwords, and then the relative destination as well. And so you can just import all of those credentials and mappings in one big CSV, and it'll get everything up and running in a quick flash. But yeah, that doesn't help with retrieving the passwords, unfortunately.
Right. IMAP.
It's it really is one of those things that it's on the way out. As Josh said, we don't currently support IMAP as a destination. I have had one or two people say they're still doing IMAP to IMAP migrations, but here's hoping that's slowly diminishing.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Excellent. I don't see any new questions that have come in at all. So I think what that means is you guys have done such an incredible job of educating us that you've answered every possible question out there. So that is good news, right? Um,
Absolutely.
Sure,
If
there'll be
there
more.
are, yeah. If there are any other questions, you can obviously reach out to our support line. We do webinars with Dan somewhat frequently, and occasionally run our own webinars as well. We love to sort of spend time in the communities. You mentioned conferences before, Dan. We will be at IT Nation in November if anyone's coming out to Florida for that. So we will see everyone there. And yeah, if there's anything that crops up, you've got myself and Josh to reach out to. Got a great team of people who will give you a hand.
Excellent. Well, Chris and Josh, thank you so much for your time and talent today, and for anybody looking to learn more about MoveBot. Of course, as Chris mentioned on the screen, there's the email address you can reach out, support@movebot.io. Of course, you can go to their website at movebot.io and learn more. You can also seek them out. I did throw in a chat a little bit ago a link to Everything MSP. If you go to everythingmsp.com, you can either use the link or just search for MoveBot, and you can learn more about them there, as well as schedule a demo or start a free trial, and all that's available right from our website. With that being said, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially again, Chris, Josh, thank you so much for your time and knowledge and sharing with us. Until next time, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Dan. Take care.
Have a good one.